Putin did not need to invade a sovereign country, in my view. Is Zelensky perfect? Nope. I don't think he is either. I agree with you on that part. But America's role, I think, should be dictated first by Europe, and they've got to defend their continent, and they haven't stepped up, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most of the European countries wanted the war either. It's clear what happened, which is that, from the beginning, we promised in 1992, the Russian leadership said, if you move NATO to the east, I'm resigning because you are forcing the Russians to come to war with us. George Kennan, who's the most important diplomat in American history, the architect of the containment policy during World War II, said the same thing. You do not need to make an enemy out of Russia.
I'm not going to lie. I think I agree more with RFK. So, folks, last night, RFK Jr. did a Fox News town hall with Sean Hannity. And there's this one part where they debate the Russia-Ukraine conflict that I think is very interesting because although RFK is a liberal, albeit maybe an old school liberal, which is maybe why we agree, but he is a liberal. Sean Hannity, obviously kind of a godfather of the conservative media space, who I do respect for that, right? But conservative guy, at least that's what, we're taught to understand. I agree more so with RFK's take, because RFK goes out and says exactly what I've been saying on this channel, which is that, look, ultimately, what we should want in Eastern Europe is peace. And United States policy, as much as we want to blame Putin and say it's just all on him, whatever, it is us who have kind of pushed the Russians and the Ukrainians to this point. And we are the ones, through our destructive funding that is obviously not helping us, but not helping the conflict either, right? We are actively stepping in and discouraging peace, right? We're trying to fight a proxy war and sacrifice a bunch of Ukrainians and Russians in the process, and it's not humane and it's not right. And I don't think ultimately it's just going to be good for anyone, right? So I'm totally America first on this front. RFK drops a take here that's a little bit controversial with Hannity, but that I absolutely agree with, which is that the U.S. needs to get out of the way, needs to get out of this conflict. Not just in the sense of, Russia needs to take over all of Ukraine, just let them do it. No, in the sense that we are the ones, as the U.S., who's stepping in and trying to stop the negotiation of peace. And we need to get out of the way so that way Russia and Ukraine can negotiate peace, is my take. And so, listen, it's a very interesting conversation here. But here's RFK and Sean Hannity going back and forth.
Peace through strength with all my heart. Control our borders. All these things. I believe that educational school choice. We agree on these things?
Yeah, we agree on all those things.
No. One area I don't like the fact that America is bearing the brunt and the burden of financing most of the war against Putin in Ukraine. I think we agree on that part. Why isn't Europe, why don't they ever step up and defend their own continent before they ask for U.S. involvement? And why would Joe Biden veto Poland, giving Zelensky fighter jets to actually fight to win the war after they were invaded?
Okay, so before RFK answers, that's the thing about Hannity, is he partly gets it in the sense of, yes, why is the U.S. funding what should be Europe's war mainly, right? Shouldn't we be the last resort? I get that. I agree with that. But at the same time, Biden vetoing, for instance, sending F-16s to Ukraine, what would that do, right? That would escalate this conflict. And RFK is going to make the case, well, what we need to do, we're not saying to give all of Ukraine to Russia. We're saying what we need to do is de-escalate this conflict. And listen to RFK's answer here. I think it's very intelligent.
Well, the more disturbing thing is that on two occasions, the Russians tried to sign a peace agreement with Zelensky.
And that's what they don't tell you.
Do I trust Putin? No, but that's not. Listen, I've litigated over 500 lawsuits. All of them end up with, or many of them end up with settlements or one kind or the other. And you never trust the guy on the other side. You use language art, and you use the design of agreements.
So Ukraine, right, to appease Putin, who I think is evil, they've already given up Crimea. It was annexed. So what? Now they have to give up the Donbas area?
Ukraine, because of our pushing the Ukraine into the war on two occasions.
We pushed them into it, or did Putin?
Well, let me tell you. Let me answer your question. Yeah. In 2019, France, Germany, and Russia all agreed to the Minsk Accords. That year, Zelensky ran for president. He was a comedian. He had no political experience. Why did he win? Because he ran on one issue, signing the Minsk Accords. As soon as he got in there, Victoria Nuland in the White House told him he couldn't do it. Then Putin sends 40,000 troops in. That's not enough to conquer the country. Clearly, he wanted us to come to the negotiation. He wanted somebody to come to the negotiating table.
Right.
Zelensky came to the negotiating table, signed a new agreement that was the Minsk Accords 2 in 2022, and that would have allowed Donbass to stay, and Lugansk to remain as part of Ukraine. We said, Putin signed it, Zelensky initialed it, and Putin, in good faith, began withdrawing troops from the Ukraine. What happened?
Right.
We sent Boris Johnson over there to torpedo it, because we don't want peace we want the war with Russia.
Yep, exactly. Right on point. And, he actually probably knows the issue better than me, but these are many of the arguments I've been making, which is that we're the ones who are kind of set this all up to happen, right? Because twice Ukraine and Russia had a peace deal that they were ready to sign, and here's how we're going to peacefully resolve our border dispute or whatever. And also, it would have been their independent decision, right? Ukraine is a sovereign nation. They should be able to decide this stuff for themselves. Zelensky won initially because he was the guy who said he was going to negotiate this with Russia. And what do? The U.S., the hawks, the global police we step in and say, no, Ukraine, do not negotiate this, blah, blah, blah. We decide what you should do for your country because we have this, Cold War with Russia, and so you need to be a proxy puppet state for our interests, right? So how is Vladimir Putin going to react to that realistically? That's number one. And then the other point I would make is even during this conflict, did you know that within the first few weeks of Russia invading Ukraine, there were already talks of peace? Russia was already ready to negotiate. But you know who stepped in and said, do not negotiate. We're going to keep funding you. And whatever you do not negotiate with the Russians. Joe Biden. Right? Joe Biden. So that's why we call this a proxy war, because, instead of just letting Ukraine and Russia, figure it out or negotiate peace for themselves, again, they will always say, you're going to give all of Ukraine to Putin? No, that's not what we're saying. But if we're saying that, right, the U.S. should not be trying to just step in and force a war, which is basically what we did, force a war and then force this war to keep going on, stalemate, continue, keep killing people, all for the sake of our own interest of, a proxy war with Russia, throwing bodies at the line, right? Ukraine should be able to make this decision for themselves if you truly cared about the Ukrainians. And yes, as much as people say Vladimir Putin is such an evil guy, and perhaps he is, he also acts in his own self-interest, right? You can be both evil and think rationally at the same time. And I don't buy this cartoonish idea that Putin just woke up one day like a nuclear madman and decided to go invade Ukraine. Clearly, there's something that led to it. And I think when you look at the timeline on this front, you actually find a lot of destructive, globalist, hawkish U.S. policy is what led us to this point. I agree 100% with RFK, and I think he articulates it quite perfectly. But all right, let's continue here.
Why are you blaming America's role in this?
So there goes Hannity, right? Why are you blaming America? Well, Hannity, I get it, patriotism. Our government is very corrupt, okay? You witnessed the Iraq war. You were around. Yes, our government does do a lot of destructive foreign policy that does not serve our interests. So it's true. We're not blaming the American people. We're blaming the American government, which, you're conservative. You kind of understand is very corrupt and does a lot of bad things, right? So,
look, Putin to me is an evil, murdering dictator thug. And when he leaves this earth, nobody's going to miss him. Let's be honest. However, I think that Europe has a responsibility to protect their continent. And yet it always seems to fall on the United States. Joe Biden has committed all these billions of dollars that we can't afford, and he's not fighting the war to win the war. I don't believe in fighting wars half-assed. If you're going to fight a war, you go in, overwhelming force, you beat them, you get the hell out. That's it, and only if it's provoked. Putin did not need to invade in a sovereign country, in my view. Is Zelensky perfect? Nope. I don't think he is either. I agree with you on that part. But America's role, I think, should be dictated first by Europe, and they've got to defend their continent, and they haven't stepped up, in my view.
Yeah, I don't think most of the European countries wanted the war either. It's clear what happened, which is that, from the beginning, we promised in 1992. The Russian leadership said, we will move. This was Gorbachev.
Yeah.
Said when the Soviet Union, he was getting ready to dismantle the Soviet Union, and he said, we're going to allow you, we're going to withdraw 400,000 troops from East Germany. Mm-hmm. And we're going to allow you to reunite Germany under NATO, which is a hostile army. That's a huge concession for them.
Right.
One commitment that we want, is what the Russians said, is that you will not move NATO to the east.
And what do we do?
James Baker, who was then Secretary of State under Bush, famously promised, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Mm-hmm. Well, since then,
what did we do?
We've moved it 1,000 miles in 14 countries.
Yep.
Now, when we started that plan in 1997, Bill Perry, who was the Secretary of Defense under Clinton, said to the Clinton administration, if you move NATO to the east, I'm resigning because you are forcing the Russians to come to war with us.
Yep.
George Kennan was the most important diplomat in American history, the architect of the containment policy during World War II, said the same thing. You do not need to make an enemy out of Russia. Russia should be treated the way we won the Cold War.
It gets complicated. Let me ask you a question.
Like I think he's completely on point there, right? We can talk all about, Russia, Putin, argue about that to the end of the day. You don't like him, I get it. But why did we expand NATO to the east? Right? There's a long track record here of broken promises on the part of, I get it, Hannity doesn't want to criticize America, but broken promises on the part of America, on the part of NATO. We keep expanding into Russia's hemisphere, right? And then when Russia tries to independently negotiate peace with the Ukrainians, with their democratically elected leader, we step in and say no. There's been talk even of adding Ukraine to NATO, which is absolutely ridiculous, but it's been a serious conversation. It was a serious conversation that Biden and some others have had. And then we think that this whole conflict came absolutely out of nowhere, right? Vince, that's defending Putin. No, it's not. It's understanding that there's a lot of complexity to this issue that no one wants to recognize or understand, right? Because we want to think as the United States, and in many ways, it's so arrogant because we've been through Iraq. We've seen all of the lies our government has told us and how our screwed up policies have led to so many global problems since the end of the Cold War. And we still stand here and think, we're so perfect in this story. It's really not the case, right? So I actually agree 100% with RFK here. My take on this, just completely 100%, we, at this point, need to negotiate a peace in Eastern Europe. Because let's be completely realistic about it. At this point, Russia's going to walk away with something, and we know that to be the case. You can sit here and pretend like Ukraine is going to take back everything, and then they're going to topple Putin No. Let's be real, right? End of the day, what's going to happen here? Ukraine will keep most of its territory. Russia will get a part of what it wants. You're going to get a negotiated peace. That's just realistically, the stalemate's going to continue for a while, and realistically, that's going to how it's going to end. So I say, why not negotiate peace now? And people say Putin doesn't want peace. He's invading Ukraine. No, believe it or not, as RFK explains, if the U.S. stopped fueling the flames of war and stopped just saying, Ukrainians, kill your people off, fight this war, you would actually find that if we stepped out of the way, the Ukrainians and the Russians would negotiate peace, because that's actually what was destined to happen. And we're the ones who stepped in and kind of caused problems there. So my take, stop funding this conflict. Do what Donald Trump wants to do. Day one, we're going to negotiate a reasonable peace in Ukraine, right? Ukraine, you get to keep most of your country. But look, Russia's realistically probably going to walk away with something. Come to the negotiating table, settle peace, and stop getting people to kill each other. That's my take. You can like Putin or not, but ultimately, what does it come down to? He's going to act in his own self-interest. If he's this crazy, evil dictator, whatever, that doesn't mean he's totally irrational in his thought. He's going to act in his self-interest. Count on him possibly doing that. And, that's my take on it. That really is my take. And I think the longer this goes, we're just pushing Russia more into the hands of China. The more we isolate Russia, we push them into the hands of China, whereas we could have kind of maybe drawn a wedge and maybe had them a little more on our side and team up against China. Not going to happen now. So it's really just screwing us over in the long run. It's reckless. And then from a humanitarian basis, A bunch of Eastern Europeans are just killing each other. What good does that do for the world in general? It doesn't do any good for Europe, that's for sure, right? And that spills over to us. Whatever, you guys know my takes. America first on this. But yeah, let me know what you thought of this Fox News Town Hall if you watched it. And before you go, be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and everyone have a very good day. Until next time, Alpha moves only. God bless and peace. Hey guys, Vince Dao here. Hope you enjoyed that clip from the Vince Dao show. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you are new to the channel. And be sure to check out the Vince Dao show live every weeknight here on this channel at 8 p.m. Eastern time. God bless.